I would hear, the first kind of lesson, sermon message I would hear was something like this. When you're dating as a Christian, here's what you should do, should not do. Here are things to do, here are things not to do. You gotta do this, you can't do that. And then here's some rules that I kind of made up and I want you to stick to. And the problem with this was that it was really heavy and cumbersome. And I was like, okay, it makes me not want to date at all because this sounds stressful. And so I felt like there was just heaping guilt on top of people and heaping shame on top of people and just a lot of heavy stuff that I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to be single for a while because apparently God hates dating. And it's just a minefield for Christians, apparently. And so I don't really like that. And I dated a little bit in high school, and I remember I was always just so guilty or nervous. I'm like, I don't want to mess this up. And it's tough because the Bible doesn't give really clear, pointed distinctives and instruction on how you're supposed to date. It gives a lot on how you're supposed to live, and you translate that to dating, but not as clear. So I don't want to do this heavy, burdensome, do this, don't do that, don't. Over time that fades, and people just get really turned off by that, or they just become the kind of Christian that are just afraid of God and afraid of messing up all the time. The second kind of relationship series that I always heard growing up was just the the traditional, everyone gets uncomfortable and awkward, hey, wait till you're married. Which is good. It's good to have that talk. We called it the true love waits talk back in the day. It is great to have that talk. I did the wait till you're married thing. That's good. But here's the problem. When we did it every single year at this time, and that was the only time we talked about relationships, here's the problem. I knew I should wait till I was married, but what I didn't know is how to date well. What I didn't know is how to have a good, Jesus-centered, Jesus-like relationship. So it was either lots of guilt, lots of rules, a couple of principles I made up that all start with the same letter on how to date, or just don't do it, wait till you're married. So what I want to do in this relationship series is I want to talk about something more foundational than just dating, okay? Or boyfriend, girlfriend. I want to get to the heart of why relationships struggle. I want to discuss the foundation of our relationships. And it's important that we do this. And so by illustration, by example, if I went to a doctor and it was Doc, I'm kind of dizzy right now and I feel kind of tired and I'm having chest pains. If a doctor heard me say that and just went, oh, well, here, I'm going to write you a prescription for dizziness and for fatigue and for chest pains. There you go. He can treat my symptoms, but he's not really getting at the cause of the problem. So let's just say I had a heart disease. Okay, well, he's giving me stuff for my symptoms, but he's not giving me anything to address my heart issue. And down the road, if my heart issue is not addressed, then it's going to be way more destructive than being lightheaded, fatigued, or having chest pain. I could die. Likewise, I think sometimes when it comes to dating, especially in the context of our Christian faith, I think sometimes we treat symptoms. It's well, wait till you're married, don't argue, establish healthy boundaries, and those are all good. But sometimes students end up going well, why? Or when they fall away from faith, they're that's just what they told me at church, and that's what I used to do, but not what I'm doing now. And then it doesn't address the hard issue of why we have problems in our relationships. What are causing some of these problems? So we need to get at the heart issue. Similarly, let's say tomorrow, my wife Brooke and I wanted to go build a house. And say we just found a random plot of land. I was like, honey, this looks good. Let's build it. And so we just pick a random patch of grass, and I start building things. I know nothing about building. This would be a disaster from the get-go, okay? But let's just say, unless it's made of Legos or Lincoln Logs, then that'd be all set. But say I start building this house, okay? Just on the ground, just on the dirt and dust. I build this house. It's big, beautiful, bricks, all of it. I even do some backsplash tile, get really creative with it because that's trendy right now. Well, cool, my house looks great. And we address things like windows and siding and whatever else, and backsplash, and flip it or flop it. And whenever we get a storm, like a bad wind, or we get some rain, my house is going to fall over because it has no foundation. Or if it starts to rain a lot, and the ground gets muddy and kind of wishy-washy, then my house is literally going to slide and fall over. Because I didn't lay a foundation first, because I was a dum-dum and I didn't put down a foundation. And that's why when they're building the house, they take extra time and precaution to build a solid, concrete, firm, symmetrical foundation. And so Likewise, when we talk about relationships, we could talk about how to speak well to one another in a relationship, or how to have good boundaries and not go too far and wait to. That's all really, really good stuff. But we have to talk about why. We have to talk about the foundation, how you view people in general. So then you can zoom into how you treat the person you're in a relationship with. That will hopefully translate into future relationships and perhaps marriage. And so I want to get at the heart issue. I want to get at the foundation. And here's what I'm going to argue. Here's what I'm going to suggest to you. And here's what we're going to talk about over the next 2 weeks. And it's a phrase maybe you've heard before, maybe you have not. We're kind of going a different route with this. We're going to talk about the image of God. Now, show of hands, who's ever heard of this phrase? I don't know who. There might be 3. Yeah, not a ton. Wow, that is actually shockingly few. Okay, good thing we're talking about this. So we're going to talk about the image of God. And here's the premise, especially for tonight. You and 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 everyone in this room is created in the image of God. And God calls this good. Just kidding. He calls it very good. God made you in his image and he calls it good. And so what I want you to realize tonight, I want you to see, we're going to look at biblically how we know we are created in the image of God and what that means. And then we're going to talk about how we view other people. We must view other people as created in the image of God. And here's going to be kind of a bottom line, kind of a thing we're going to be saying throughout the night. We have to see and celebrate and protect and respect the image of God in one another. Because I would argue that if we don't have this down, the way we view people in general, all of our relationships are going to be impacted by that. If you view people as just a nuisance or annoying, that's going to be problematic in all of your relationships. If you view people as a means to an end, a means of getting what you want, all of your relationships are going to suffer and struggle. But if you recognize that you are created in the image of God, which is profound, and you realize that the person across from you, whether dating or otherwise, is created in the image of God, that's a game changer. That's what every single relationship should be built upon. And so that's what we're going to get into tonight. So we're going to start out in Genesis, and that's basically where we're going to be all night. We're going to be in Genesis 1. And Genesis 1 starts out, and it says this. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, in the original language in the Hebrew, this is a way of saying, at a point in time, God created all things. It's very general, this first phrase. And Genesis has this cool movement of being really general to moving really specific. And so at a point in time, God created all things. Now, quick disclaimer, because I like to do this. Some people in the room will go, oh, I don't believe in all that. I believe in science. But here's the deal. I'm the most critical, skeptical person of all time. I've studied all the philosophies, worldviews, religions, et cetera, et cetera. Science cannot explain where we came from. And so if you automatically check out because you're I believe in science, hold up. Here's what I'm going to ask you. As someone who believes the Bible, the truth of the Bible, the accuracy and infallibility of the Bible, I would ask you, if you have any hesitations, put them aside for the evening and try to follow us where we're going. A lot of my friends, they would see this verse and they'd be like, peace, I'm out, not interested. Don't check out, follow. And again, if you're just science, it's not going to explain the origin of all things. It's not going to explain purpose in your life, and it's not going to explain where everything's going. So you're going to be sorely disappointed if that's your worldview. I won't go any more on that. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. What unfolds from here is, in the original language, in the Hebrew language, it's called historical narrative, and it's written like poetry. So again, this isn't a science textbook describing the creation of all things. It's this poem. It actually reads like a poem in Hebrew. I could make nerdy grammar arguments for you as to why this is, but I'll save you the boredom or the little short nap. And so there's this poem that unfolds, and there's this really cool rhythm to it where God speaks and something is created, and God speaks and something is created. And then after every single day of creation, God looks back at what he did, and he goes, that is good. And the word for good in Hebrew, I love this word, it's tov. Everyone say tov. Look at your neighbor and just say, tov. Yeah, good. You want to have that all the time. Beans, don't look over there. There's no one sitting over there. Look at the person. Yeah, there you go. Tov. And so God says it's good. And then on the sixth day of creation, God creates everything that dwells on the land. And then he gives it purpose and order. Then he looks at it and he goes, ooh, that's tov. Everyone say tov. And then God does something incredible. At the end of the sixth day, God decides to create humanity. Now, before we get into this passage, something you need to know. Genesis 1 and 2 are very similar. Genesis 1 gives a more general description of creation. Then the story is retold in Genesis 2 in a more specific way. This week, we're going to look at Genesis 1. Next week, we're going to end the series by looking at Genesis 2, and we're going to see the differences there. So Genesis 1 opens up in verse 26, and God says this. God said, let us make man in our image and our likeness. Pause there. When it says man, it doesn't mean a male. The word in Hebrew here is Adam. It means mankind, humanity. So if I was translating this, I would actually say, God said, let us make humanity in our own image and likeness. Now, some of you see image and likeness, and you're like, what does it mean? What's that? I want to unpack these two words for you, okay? We're only going to pull this section of text apart. So for those of you who like to dive deeper, you're going to like this. And for the rest of you, I think there's some good truth here. There's some good things that you can learn from this. The first word here we see is image. And in Hebrew, this word, I'm going to teach you this word too. This is a fun one. Throw it up there. It's tselem, okay? So that's a TZ sound. Tselem. Try to say it. Tselem. Nice. Someone said celery? I could go for some celery right now. That's a good idea. Maybe some carrot sticks? I don't know. All right, tselem. And what tselem means is it means image or statue. Now, let me explain what this meant culturally. When the book of Genesis was written, as they were looking back on this creation story and communicating it to the people in the present, in this culture, kings would oftentimes conquer a land, and they would establish a statue of themselves. And in the statue would perfectly resemble them. It would look like the king. And this statue was to do a couple things. It was, first of all, to remind all the people of the land who the king was. And then it was to demonstrate to everyone the reign and rule of that king. So if you were in a particular part of the world in ancient Near East, and you saw a statue of a king, that was called a tselem. It was in the tselem, or the image of the king that ruled the land. It would demonstrate that this king ruled over the land. Now, some of you are like, I think I get it, but let me give you an illustration. So, back in the day, right before World War II, in Russia, they started building what's called the Soviet Empire, okay, or the Soviet Union. And there's this guy named Joseph Stalin. And Joseph Stalin began to expand Russia. And in a ton of the cities that they kind of conquered or subsumed or kind of took over, he would put a statue of himself. And this even went through World War II to the Cold War. He would kind of basically conquer this land, if you will, or assume it, and he would put a statue up. So we actually have a picture of this. So this is actually in this place in Europe, a city called Budapest in Hungary. And when people saw this, they were reminded, okay, that is the tselem, that is the image, that is the statue of Joseph Stalin, and that is supposed to make us think of him. It's supposed to remind us who rules over us, and this is showing that he has dominion and reign over this plot of land, over this city. That's what this word means in Hebrew, tselem. And so basically, God creates humanity in his tselem, in his image. And so what it was supposed to communicate to everyone around is that when they look at humanity, when they look at human beings, they're supposed to be reminded of God, of the Creator. And they're supposed to be reminded that God rules and God reigns over everything. And so, let's see, that statue eventually gets toppled, boom. But see, it's right in the image of that guy, of Joseph Stalin. So, God created us in his image. This is this word picture. Something about us is supposed to look like God, to remind people of God, to show people and remind people of God's good rule and reign in the earth. Now, go back to the verse. Let's look at the second word. Let us make humanity in our image, in our tselem, and in our likeness. So it's going to use two words. Hebrew does this a lot. It will use two words. It's kind of like doing two coats of paint, so you can really understand what's going on. And the word here is damut. Everyone say damut. And damut is pretty simple, people. It just means likeness or resemblance. So let me illustrate this to you. This is a picture of my grandpa, okay? Looks right. Looks exactly. Who whistled? Was that you, Beans? I mean, thanks, but, you made it weird. Made it weird. But yeah, I mean, I look almost exactly like him. There's a strong resemblance there. I am a little more smiley. He was a stern-faced man. I think the cameraman maybe owed him some money or something. I don't know. Smiling was not as in vogue or in fashion back then. But I look a lot like him. In Genesis, it's trying to tell us that we were made in that damut. We were made in the likeness of God. Something about us, human beings, resembles God. which is pretty incredible. And I don't know if you've ever heard that in church. Something about us resembles God, or reminds people of God. When they look at us, it's something about that is supposed to remind them of the Creator. That's incredible. So then the verse goes on, and we're going to see this image discussed, these two words, image. Everyone say tselem for image, and then damut. Everyone say damut. And remember, this is like two coats of paint trying to get at this big idea that we reflect the Creator. We're supposed to show other people what God is like. Something about us resembles God. And so then it goes on to further emphasize this point. Let's throw the verse back up there. When you're reading your Bible, this is for those of you that are helping your small group, your quiet time, or your Bible study time, whatever. When you're reading the scriptures and you see repetition, it's there for a reason. And so you can like circle words and note that, oh, the author's trying to communicate something here. Look at the repetition here. God made mankind in our image, in our likeness. Then he gives them purpose and value. And then it says, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. If you were writing this in your English class, you would get points deducted for being repetitive and redundant. But in Hebrew poetry, you do this to emphasize a point, or to emphasize something, make a point. So look how many times it says, created man in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. This repetition is supposed to emphasize just how profound it is that we were created in the image of God. And therefore, we have infinite worth and value. Then I want to look at this phrase. This is pretty interesting. This is pretty fascinating. It says, male and female, he created them. It uses this last line to communicate something. Now, this is profound in two ways. One, it identifies that both the male and the female are both created in the image of God. This was a novel idea back in the day when Genesis was written, because the surrounding cultures put little to no value on women. And a lot of times they would think, well, men are the picture of the gods, or the king is the picture of the god. Women didn't matter. Women had no or low value. The Bible starts out by saying, no. Mankind, humanity is created in the image and the likeness of God. Male and female, equal, unified as the image of God. But here's what's cool too. Not only are they unified, not only are both the image of God, but they're both distinct. It uses two different letters and it sets them apart. It says male and female, he created them. And so this distinction between the two is celebrated. It's a good thing. Now, I'm not going to dig into this too much, but here's something that I find interesting as I read this. Socially, you guys are, this is prevalent in your guys' culture. So I say your guys', my family's from New York. In y'all's culture, pardon me, just died saying y'all. Sorry. In your guys' day and age, this is more of a prevalent thing than in mine. But today, there's all this talk about gender and like who identifies what and how. And some people think, well, it's not good that I'm a man. And some people think it's not good that I'm a woman. And here's the thing. Right after it says that God created male and female, he created them, it says this in the next verse, or just a few verses later. It says, and God saw that he had made what he had made, and behold, it was very good. It was very good. God looked at the creation, mankind in his image, male and female, distinct. They're unified in that they have the same image of God, but they're distinct in their purposes and in their identity. And he says that's good. And so for people who I've talked to who are trying to figure out, and they're trying to sift through the waters, and they're trying to wade through the waters and try to figure things out when it comes to identity, one of the things I like to encourage them with, and I'm talking about close family of mine and close friends of mine, I just say, hey, how you were created, how God made you is good. If you were born male, that is good. And you might not, there might be something in your head that or something that you're feeling, something in your heart that you're struggling with, but I would just encourage you, that is good. The color of your hair, the texture of your hair, the color of your eyes, the color of your skin, whether you were born male or female, it's good. God says it's very good. And so I just want to encourage you in that, or if you have any friends who are going through that right now, and they're like, well, I'm trying to figure out my identity. I mean, you can look at them and say, hey, I would encourage you. The way you were born, what's written on your birth certificate, that is good. We need men in the world, and we need women in the world. And God knew this. In the image of God, he created them. And so both are good, and both have inherent value and worth, an infinite inherent value and worth. Now, we talked about creation, how we're created in the tselem and the damut of God, the image and likeness of God. So what are some implications for us? What does this mean for us? Like, why is this important to us to realize? Well, because we were created in the image of God, something about us resembles the Creator, and because God said that this is very good, very tov, we should act accordingly. We should realize the worth and the value that we have, and we should recognize that worth and value in others. So just like we said at the beginning, we have to see and celebrate and protect and respect the image of God in one another, in ourselves and in the person across from us, whatever relationship this is, dating or otherwise. You have to see and celebrate the image of God and respect it. And the problem is we don't value and emphasize people enough. So let me illustrate something for you. So I looked up some paintings, okay? I just Googled it. I was like, because this is how I type with my computer all the way up here. Most expensive paintings of all time, okay? So I'm going to show you the first one. Let's throw it up there. Are you kidding me? What is this? And so this is by Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, everyone sit down, okay? Because you're going to pass out. This sold for $450 million. $450 million. I don't even know what this is. It looks like they're missing a cigarette. Are you done throwing me now? I don't know what the story is. But it was made by Leonardo da Vinci. So people go, I'm going to pay $450 million for it. Let me show you another one. This one's even worse. Let's go to this one. What is that indeed? It looks like something a cat coughed up. This is by a guy named Jackson Pollock. And do you know how much it sold for? 250. That feels like the price is right now. Come on down. $250 million. 250. I don't know what it is. But here's the deal. These pieces of art, these created things, are ascribed so much worth and so much value because of who made them. The first one was Leonardo da Vinci. People love Leonardo da Vinci. The other one's Jackson Pollock. People love Jackson Pollock. And because of what they made, because these pieces were made by these brilliant creators, they were ascribed worth and value. And people put them in cases with armed guards, and like you're not supposed to touch them, the paintings, because you get destructive oils on them from your hands. And if you're so moved that you cry, you can't cry because it'll make the paint run. And so here's what we see from that. How you treat the creation has a lot to say about how you feel about the Creator. And so people value Leonardo da Vinci, Jackson, or whatever his name, Pollock. Kevin Pollock? I don't know, it's an actor. And so we too, all the more than these terrible paintings, sorry, subjective, but terrible paintings, should value one another. If you mistreat people, if you talk down to people, if you look down on people, if you're in a relationship and you're just like, I'm in it for me, I don't know about them, I'm in it for me, you are not valuing this precious creation that God put in front of you. You are not celebrating and seeing and respecting and protecting the image of God in another person. The image of God has to have a weight. You have to realize how valuable you are and how valuable other people are. And if you establish that early on, that is going to be beneficial to all your relationships. But here's the problem. We talked about creation. We talked about the image of God. We talked about why this is important. But here's the problem. From Genesis 3 on, humanity has a problem recognizing the image of God in themselves and the image of God in other people. And people continually turn away from God and do their own thing. And right after Genesis, where we're at in Genesis 1 and 2, Genesis 3 on, all you see is a downward spiral. And we call it the fall. And all you see is people acting crazy. You see Adam and Eve have kids. One of the brothers murders the other one. And when that happens, God comes on the scene and God goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. You're not supposed to murder people. You don't murder that person. Pay attention to this. You don't murder that person because they're created in my image. Because the tselem and the damut of God is important. The image and likeness of God is important. It gives us worth and value. So God says you can't murder people because they're created in my image and have infinite inherent value. But it just keeps persisting. And if you read, especially like Genesis 3 to 6, it's crazy. People just start killing each other. People start murdering each other. You see all kinds of racism and genocide. And people are like hooking up with animals. It's just gross and weird. And honestly, the Bible turns into southern Florida in that part, okay? That's just, so if you're from southern Florida, I'm sorry. It's just a joke. It's harmless. But I mean, like, Southern Florida did have a guy who thought it was a zombie and was eating people's faces a couple years ago. So I'm just saying, just, beware. So it's like, it's really depraved. And echoes of this, and God is always, we're going to talk about this in a second, God's always renewing and restoring, but the problem is people keep turning away, and we see the effects of that today. If you look around the world today, we still don't value people like we should. We see that there's still wars, and there's still racism and genocide. There's still mistreatment of women. There's still people that just hate other people. Like, I know people that are just like, oh, I hate people. And so we see this today. We see this socially. We even see this relationally. We see this with a high divorce rate. We see this with the high rate of abuse in relationships. We even see this in a high rate of people getting married much, much, much later or not at all, because people don't know how to be in relationship with each other because they don't value one another like they should. And so we feel the effects of the fall today. You look around the world, you watch the news, you're going to feel it. But here's the good news. While this might seem hopeless, here's the good news. God, from Genesis on, has been working to restore and redeem creation and to pull creation forward. So from Genesis 3 to 6, it's this like really like poop show of like horrible things, but God has a plan, and God calls his people Israel, and he says, okay, Israel, I'm going to kind of restart with you, and you're actually going to show all the other nations what I'm like. You're going to image me. You're going to remind them who's in charge, and this is going to be a blessing to them. And so that's God's plan. And so that pulls things forward, and God starts putting laws in place to protect people and protect the image and protect the value and the worth of people. But Israel sometimes doesn't do a good job, and they're good and they're not good and not good. But then God, right at the end of the Old Testament, makes these promises that, you know what? I'm going to restore the image. This image that's been kind of broken since the fall, how people no longer are my tselem or my damut, or they at least don't act like it and they don't see it in one another. I'm going to, in a profound and mysterious way that's hard to comprehend and fully understand, I'm going to come down to their level. In the Gospel of John, it says that God takes on flesh and makes his dwelling among us. God is embodied in Jesus and in the life of Jesus. And so we see Jesus in the New Testament is what a lot of New Testament authors come to describe as the new creation or the new humanity. In fact, one of the writers of the New Testament, Paul, says that Jesus is the image of the living God. God in the bod. It's this restored image. What was lost early on in Genesis is restored in Jesus. And this is the restoration. This is the hope that the world had then and the hope that the world has now. And this is what's incredible. In the life of Jesus, you see Jesus demonstrating this image of God. You see him acting how God would act. And here's something that I have found in years of studying the Bible and listening to sermons. A lot of times, all we talk about is the cross. Amen and hallelujah. That is good. But Jesus also lived a life before that. Jesus didn't just like come down, step onto the cross. No, Jesus lived a life. And part of Jesus' life was to show us this renewed image of God. The early writers of the New Testament and the early church, they understood this. And when you look at the life of Jesus, not only did he demonstrate the image of God, but he affirmed the image of God in others. And here's something, this is where we're going to kind of land today. It's kind of our last section. He restored human dignity. He gave people their humanity back, their dignity back. He saw people as precious children of God, precious creations of God. And if you're thinking like, where's that? Okay, there's a story of this woman that's caught in adultery. And all these dudes want to kill her and execute her because, like, that's against the law. We're going to kill you. Well, Jesus shows up on the scene. He calls these religious people that want to execute this poor woman. He calls them out. They all scatter. Jesus leans down, and the Greek word that Jesus uses is ma'am. He says, ma'am, who all, if you read it in your Bibles, we'll say woman. If you read it in the original Greek, it says, ma'am, who condemns you? And the woman looks around, and she says, no one. And Jesus says, neither do I. Go and sin no more. And this woman who was in the dirt and the dust and the ground, who had her dignity stripped from her, who had her humanity kind of taken away from her, who was not being treated as someone created in the image of God with infinite worth and value, this woman is given a new lease on life. And this woman has her dignity restored and her humanity restored. The image of God is seen and celebrated and respected and protected in her. And Jesus doesn't stop there. He does this all throughout his earthly ministry. There's this guy with this disease called leprosy, and he's just covered in boils, and people were afraid of him, and they were afraid that they were going to get this disease he had, so he had to live outside the city. And so Jesus went up to this leper, this guy with this bad disease, and he says, hey, you're clean, you're healed, you're welcomed back into your community. You can interact in the marketplace again. You can be around your family again. You can worship in the temple again. And this person who was a social outcast had their dignity restored. They had their life given back. Jesus saw the image of God in this person and was like, oh, that's good. And Jesus did this throughout his ministry as he healed people and he interacted with the poor. He restored people's dignity. He saw and celebrated and respected and protected the image of God and other people as the image of God himself, the perfect image of God. So what I want to do is I want to illustrate this with a quick video. And in this video, there's this guy, I found this online. For the Super Bowl, he wanted to have a Super Bowl party, but kind of a unique Super Bowl party where he reached out to some people who perhaps felt like they were less than other people. People who socially are maybe scorned, like the person with leprosy. And what this guy does is he restores a little bit of dignity and humanity and celebrates the image of God and these people. Let's roll that. And when we see stuff like that, it should resonate with us. Because deep down, I think we have this internal sense, this inherent sense that we were created in the image of God, that others are created in the image of God. And anytime we are restoring someone's dignity or respecting and celebrating and protecting the image in others, that is a good and Jesus thing to do. Also, that is the only way to get someone to root for the Patriots, just so you know. That's the only way to get someone to root for the Patriots. So I want to give you one more story. I heard this story one time when talking about restoring dignity, celebrating the image of God in others. I read this story one time about in World War II, as many of you know, Nazi Germany went on this campaign to exterminate and eliminate the Jewish people. And they gathered them together in concentration camps, and there was this horrible genocide. And in that effort, they stripped people of their dignity. They stripped people of their humanity. They did not believe that the Jewish people were created in the image of God. They thought they were just like animals, and they could just be slaughtered like animals. Again, an inherent problem with not celebrating and respecting the image of God in other people. And so they had these concentration camps where they just did atrocious, horrendous things. But at the end of World War II, as the Allies began to move across Europe, and this wave of Allies swept through and pushed all the Nazis out of the concentration camps, there's a story about this British brigade of soldiers that busted down the gate to this concentration camp. We actually have a picture of it, called Bergen-Belsen. And this is a horrible place. And what they saw, they describe in detail, and I will not share it with you because it's that disturbing. But I mean, they're just piles of bodies, people having to like eat dirt and worms and stuff to survive. And it was like hell on earth. And so what the British soldiers were trying to do is they were trying to get like medical supplies, they were trying to get food, and they were trying to get water, and they were trying to get clothes, and they were trying to save people, and they're trying to like do medical procedures on people. And this one general writes, he says, of all the supplies they sent over, someone, he doesn't know who, sent over like a big cargo piece, a big cargo box of lipstick. And he thought it was the weirdest thing he'd ever seen. He thought it was completely pointless. These people need more than that. But he says, whoever thought to do that is a genius. He says it was an act of unadulterated brilliance. Because what happened was the women at this concentration camp, the women started to grab the lipstick and they'd put it on. And this army soldier is writing in his diary, and he says he saw women with nothing but a blanket just kind of limping around, but they had red lipstick, and it was almost like you could see a smile crack. And he said he would see someone who was like, he'd see a woman barely holding herself up, but she had a thing of lipstick in her hand and her lips were red. Or he saw some women who were so malnourished they could barely stand up, but they put on the lipstick, and something about that lipstick made them feel beautiful again, made them feel like they had worth and value again. Something about that lipstick restored their identity. And when they got it, they're like, someone thought of me. And they felt human again. And so there's always going to be an inherent problem, socially, relationally, maritally, when we don't see and celebrate the image of God in others, and when we don't protect and respect the image of God in one another. And so I don't want you leaving here tonight without realizing how important it is to realize that you are created in the image of God, and that the person sitting next to you on either side and in front of you is also created in the image of God, and you should treat them accordingly. And if you can start that now and have that foundation and address that heart issue, then that will serve you well in all of your relationships, in your dating, which we're going to talk through more specifically next week, and then one day in marriage. And we see in marriage this intense, focused, exerted effort to treat one another in the image of God. And marriage and the romantic relationship God puts us in is supposed to be kind of a beacon of light to other people. Marriage is not something to be endured or feared or run away from for years. Marriage is a good thing. Relationships are a good thing. And there's something good and godly and holy about a relationship in which someone fully sees and understands and appreciates the image of God in that other person. And so I want to leave you with this one last video. And it's this couple, this elderly couple, and the woman started losing some sight in one of her eyes. And she got to the point where she couldn't put on really her own makeup anymore because she couldn't see right. And her husband, who values her as the image of God that she is, as the precious child created by God, showing his intense love for her, he decides, you know what? I'm going to help her with this. I'm going to bring a little dignity to her, a little humanity to her. So check this out. This is like a minute and a half. This is beautiful. There's something holy about that. There's something right about that. And as we're in this relationship series, I could tell you a list of rules and do's and don'ts. That might be helpful. I could tell you the true love waits thing, and that is good. And we're going to get into some of that next week. But what I want you to really walk away with is that realization of the image of God and the weight of that and the beauty of that. And so I first of all want you to know that how God made you, how you were born, the color of your hair, the texture of your hair, the color of your skin, the color of your eyes, born male, female, it is good. And God says it is very good. And what God has called good, do not let anyone call anything less. And what God has called good, don't let anyone treat as anything less. And don't leave here tonight without looking inward, assessing how you view other people. Because if you can get this and grasp this, this will be a game changer for you as you move forward. So may you continue to see and celebrate the image of God in each and every single person. And may you protect and respect the image of God in each and every single person. And may you realize that this isn't a message that lifts up people, lifts up humanity. No, it lifts up the God who created us. The God who, it says in Romans, demonstrated his love to us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So may you feel the weight of that tonight. Let's pray.